Good afternoon, everyone. I am Zakiya Sankara-Jabar. I am the Director for Education Policy and Activism for the Wayfinder Foundation. We are excited to welcome you all here today for our second virtual town hall. And we're excited to welcome the Nollie Jenkins Family Center here with us today. We have three members from the Nollie Jenkins Family Center, and we also have the co-executive director for Racial Justice Now, Brother Hashim Jabar. We're excited today to talk about something very important, certainly connected to Black literacy, overall Black student achievement. And we are here to educate the public about the need to end corporal punishment in Mississippi and in the 19 states in this country where it is still legal to what would otherwise be known as assaulting a child. Is known as corporal punishment. So we will allow everyone to come in now to introduce themselves. We're excited to welcome those of you who have joined us. Just for some housekeeping, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and share this opportunity to engage. We welcome you all to make comments, to ask questions in the comments. Hopefully towards the end of the presentation today, we will be able to take some questions from those of you who are listening with us today. I would like to toss it to Hashim Jabar because we're going to have everyone who you see here today introduce themselves before we get into today's presentation. Hashim?
Peace and blessings, and thank you for this opportunity to be here with you all. I'm very excited to get into this dialogue. My name is Hashim Jabar. I'm the co-executive director of Racial Justice Now. We've been doing the work to end the school-to-prison pipeline, end anti-Black institutional racism for the last 11 years. It's a pleasure to work with our family in Mississippi, who we met primarily through the Dignity in Schools campaign. So we're always thankful for that connection to make that connection between our families on the East Coast and the West Coast and the North and the South through the Dignity in Schools campaign. Our family, Ellen Reedy and Sister Kameisha, Ellen being connected to Baltimore, close by us making that connection, and Kameisha being a youth organizer and being a veteran and seasoned organizer at a very young age. So it's a great blessing to be here with also Katie Coates. And so I'm just excited to join in on this conversation. We're going to be talking about culturally relevant curriculum and how we can provide some solutions around why corporal punishment is unnecessary. So I look forward to getting in this conversation with you all. Mississippi on my mind. My mayor for life in Washington, D.C., the great Marion Barry from Mississippi. Some of the great organizers of SNCC from Mississippi. Dr. Amos Wilson, one of our great psychologists and Black professionals, author of A Blueprint of Black Power, and many other gigantic works that really lifted up the facts of our children being ahead and being advanced of all other children before they encounter the school system. So that great respect and love and admiration that I have for Mississippi, I'm happy to be here with you on behalf of Racial Justice Now.
All right, we'll have Ellen introduce herself. Thank you.
Good morning. And again, thank you to Zakiya and Hashim. Thank you for those great remarks. I'm Ellen Reedy. I'm the interim executive director for Nollie Jenkins Family Center. We also facilitate the Mississippi Coalition to End Corporal Punishment. And like Hashim said, we've been doing this work in Mississippi 25 plus years. Looking at derailing what we call the train from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse, because we know that there are policies and practices that push our children from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse. So we're also about disrupting and derailing that train. And I'm glad to be here with my, as Hashim said, Kameisha's been a youth organizer coming up through the work. So it's really good to have her on here this morning, as well as Katie. When we reached out, when we started the Mississippi Coalition, she had no quivers. She was clear. Yeah, we need to end corporal punishment in Mississippi. So I'm pleased to be here and look forward to getting into the presentation and sharing with all of you why it is necessary to end corporal punishment to advance Black student achievement. I'll pass it to Kameisha. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kameisha Smith. I am the Youth Program Coordinator with Nollie Jenkins Family Center. I started off with the Nollies when the twins came to Mississippi and created a child care facility for teen parents. So I've been around. I also serve as the lobbyist for the Mississippi Coalition to End Corporal Punishment. So I am at the Capitol in the faces of the policymakers, making sure that they know about what's going on, because we'll get into it later. And how are we talking about this issue to policymakers and communities as well, because a lot of people don't know it's going on if it's not directly impacting them. So thank you all for joining in. Hopefully you will take something from this presentation and also take the action steps that we have laid out to end corporal punishment and implement effective alternatives to school discipline.
That's right. And we would like for Katie, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you all. I just really feel called to do this work. My name's Katie Coates. I'm a native of Jackson, Mississippi. I have 5 kids who are Black. I have deep concern about the success of Black children, and I'm happy to be here to help share why, at least with a medical and psychological perspective, why it's imperative that we stop this practice of corporal punishment for children's success. I worked 15 years in the emergency room in a pediatric setting. I've done home care, and then for the past 3 years, I've really devoted myself to environmental justice and racial justice, social justice. Mississippi is a wonderful place, but we have some justice concerns, some justice issues. So I'm happy to be with these wonderful people and grateful for y'all for this opportunity. That's it.
Thank you all so much. We're excited about this conversation. Kameisha, I believe you will lead us in today's conversation on protecting students in schools and why ending corporal punishment is necessary for Black student academic success. Please take it away.
I will introduce. I won't start off. You'll hear from me towards the end, but I guess I will go over the agenda, run of show for today. We want to talk about why corporal punishment is harmful. There have been over 300 studies talking about the negative impacts of corporal punishment, but we also want to take it back and look at the historical context of corporal punishment and where it really comes from. And then Katie will lead us in the mental and emotional health context of how state-sanctioned violence really impacts all children, even though it's being disproportionately used against Black girls and Black boys in schools. And then I will come on and talk about how are we talking about this issue in communities, the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, and what is the work that we are continuing to do to make sure that corporal punishment is eliminated inside of schools. So I will pass it to Ms. Ellen.
Thank you, Kameisha. As you can see, there is no question that corporal punishment hurts students and the school climate. In 2017-2018, over 70,000 children were hit in public schools. Currently, there are 22 states that continue to allow corporal punishment. Oftentimes you hear us say 17, but we use the data coming from the Department of Education Dear Colleague letter where they identified 22 states, because if in state law it is not expressly prohibited, it can still happen, although the district may not be using it because there's still a state law they can use it and get away with it. In 2017, Black students were 2.3 times more likely than white students to be hit in schools. Black students, Native American students, and students with disabilities are more likely to be hit than their peers, even though they are not more likely to break school rules. What do we know about the harms of corporal punishment? Corporal punishment can be physically harming. Many children suffer bruises, cuts, and broken bones as a result of corporal punishment. Think about that. When we're talking about corporal punishment, we're talking usually about principals having the right to hit children. And we know that for the most part, principals are males. And so they can hit a child from pre-K through 12th grade, including girls. It can also cause mental health problems. Students who are hit in front of their peers are likely to experience trauma and low self-esteem. They could be emotionally humiliated. We all know why we're called to the principal's office, so even when they come back to the classroom, their peers know that they've been corporally punished. It can affect attendance and academics. If children are not in school, they cannot learn. When children are hurt inside of schools, they can build a mistrust for relationships with teachers and other school personnel. So we know that corporal punishment can harm attendance and academics. It can also have an impact on school safety. Corporal punishment has no safety purpose in schools and can compromise the trust and relationships that are critical for school safety and building children's self-esteem. It also models behavior. I was at a swim practice a few weeks ago, and parents were there, and there was this little 2-year-old, and the father told him to put down something, and he said, "If you don't, I'm going to smack your hands." And I turned and looked and thought, do you see the contradiction in what you said to that child? But modeling, we model violence when we hit children. We don't give them the tools and skills that they need to resolve their own conflicts. We know that it is ineffective as a discipline practice. It is ineffective and counterproductive as a discipline practice and for a teaching tool. So in essence, what we're saying to children is that big makes right. And usually it's bigger children or bigger adults hitting on children. There are also civil rights violation. Corporal punishment is disproportionately used against students with disabilities and students of color, particularly Black students, who are more likely to receive corporal punishment than their white peers and non-disabled peers for the same behavior. And it is extreme punishment. Corporal punishment is extremely harsh and is often used to punish small offenses, even those behaviors that are completely normal and age appropriate. May be a sign of other needs students having, that their needs are not being met. Let's step back for a second and do this kind of historical look at where this all comes from. Oftentimes we, as African Americans, we associate 1619 as a time when we were enslaved. But the reality is the enslavement of Africans really started in 1440. So, when you think about Africans, African people being enslaved, the first Africans were really brought to the West Indies, to do sugarcane. They may have been brought to South America. But just in terms of the U.S. soil, we look at a date of 1619. But if we looked at 1440 as a time when Africans were being enslaved, we're talking about over 500 years of enslavement. We've gone through a period, for example, we had an infrastructure done that really looks at this period in time in history. And so we start with 1619 or 1440. That was a time during slavery when the most tragic human rights violations against Africans and Black people, which included kidnapping, exploitation, human trafficking, family separation, rape, abuse, free labor, suffrage, murder, and other crimes. That was for a period of time. Then we came into this seasoning where slaves, again, were taken to the West Indies to dehumanize them, to liberate their identity, to sever their past bonds, to teach the European language, to rename them, adapt to a new forced labor and living conditions. Next slide, please, Kameisha. Then we go into this period, the next slide, of what we call lynching. And we know that lynching were acts of racial victimization, terror, and control used against Black people to enforce Jim Crow laws in Southern states. Form of punishment and a torture leading to deaths included hanging, strangling a person by their neck, often accompanied by other forms of torture to prolong the agony for the victims, including tarring, feathering, beating, mutilation by white racist mobs. Victims committed a minor offense, similar to what we're talking about when we talk about corporal punishment, or no offense at all. And in Mississippi, in particular, the first broadly publicized deadly lynching happened in Vicksburg, which was in 1835. Between 1863 and 1950, there were at least 708 lynchings in Mississippi alone, the vast majority of these victims being Black. Why? And then, of course, we come into Jim Crow, into the Black codes, where, it was legal to return a free person into slavery. And then, of course, the most important and probably well-known lynching was the lynching of Emmett Till. Next slide, please, Kameisha. But we have to know that this is all connected. When we talk about, there's a piece where inside of our communities, we talk about intergenerational violence. The reality is that the colonization of our people and the treatment of our people has been passed from generation to generation. In the South in particular, where most of the states still use corporal punishment, it's harder to remove corporal punishment. And we don't see right now any policies moving in that direction. While we have Florida, Arkansas, Tennessee, even Mississippi has legislation to end corporal punishment, it's not likely to happen without the will of the people. Next slide, Kameisha. But we can see that it is all connected. It's connected, again, when we think about the enslavement of people and the enslavement of our minds and our bodies, and this notion of state-sanctioned violence against Black bodies and brown bodies in the United States. We carry this. We carry this feeling of, let me say this. Have we even, and these are questions I want to raise to the audience, have we ever thought as a Black or brown community how we will be with our children? Or are we just carrying on practices that our grandparents and others have used against us? Those are the questions that we have to ask ourselves as a community. At what point in time in history have we, as people of African descent, and that includes brown people, really had the conversation to talk about how we will be with our children? How do we bring in traditional models of being together to talk about what's important as we rear our children and provide the kind of safety net for them inside communities that say, when you go inside of a school, this is how we expect you to treat our children? I'll end here and allow Katie to talk about the mental and emotional well-being of children when they've been exposed to state-sanctioned violence, such as corporal punishment. Katie?
Thank you, Ellen. Yes, I want to talk a little bit about the mental, emotional, and also the physical aspects around why corporal punishment is conflict with children's success in schools. And first, I just want to highlight sort of this trend on the national education scene right now. And that is discussing this idea of social emotional learning. It really came out early on, I think maybe in the 60s. It started really entering the scene as an idea about the wholeness of a child, But right now it talks more about 5 key aspects that really help us. We can go on to the next one, on to the next slide. And these aspects are defined by the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning as self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And so there's a big kind of I'll just name this elephant in the room. If we're talking about children's social emotional wellness and all of these factors, then obviously there's a huge conflict if we're saying that children are allowed to be hit by adults in those settings also. So I just want to name that as just a big conflict in the whole education scene. And then we'll go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about more of the aspects and how it impacts our health. The data shows that children who get hit, the peak point in a child's life is between ages 3 and 4. And the science lets us know that their brain is still really actively developing at this time. And so it's important that we're doing all things to support a healthy brain and brain development. And as you'll see in the upcoming slides, there's a slew of people in the health care world, in the medical world, and in the world of mental health who agree right now that spanking doesn't actually work. It does not create what we want, which is successful Black students. And the unfortunate truth behind the situation is that it actually shrinks the gray matter in the brain. There was a study done by the Harvard Medical School, and it showed that 14 to 19% less gray matter is the result of these striking of a child. So whether it's spanking or hitting, any physical punishment as a way to control a little person actually impacts their body and their brain's development. The sort of change that's happened most recently in the idea of the Department of Health and Human Services on a big scale is this idea that spanking is now also considered an ACE. An ACE is an adverse childhood experience that can be abuse. And the shift is that even hitting or like pinching or what we might say popping, all of that is included now as physical abuse, because the body doesn't actually differentiate how hard it was. The damage that happens to a little person is not distinguishing. And so there's abuse, there's neglect, and then there's also household dysfunction. All of these are under the category of ACE, adverse childhood experiences. We can go on to the next slide. Corporal punishment is definitely one of those adverse childhood experiences. The fact of the matter is that puts children into a category that increases their risk of a lot of real bad outcome, pretty much. This is the list of the outcomes that it increases them for: homelessness, unintended sexual partners, domestic violence, addiction, alcoholism, drug abuse, depression. So it's really clear. It's not, the verdict is in that ACEs are not good for children in the long run. This is more of those kind of correlation between some of the harmful effects. Go ahead. It's okay. We can go on to that next slide. This slide, I know it's little and there's a lot to read, and I'm I'm sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. I do want to real quickly shout out Dr. Stacy Patton, who created a lot of these slides. I'm borrowing these from her with permission, but she's a real advocate for children and has just done a lot of media content and research and really made it accessible. Ultimately, she sort of helped the Black community in the Black science community in recognizing that a brain is a brain is a brain. And so that's what this slide specifically talks about. There's been some confusion around the idea that hitting children is a cultural aspect. It's actually not. There's if you look back at the history, as Miss Ellen spoke about, it's not actually part. It's sort of part of the confusion and the lie. And the actual legacy of the lash is connected to slavery. It's not really connected to Africa. But also in our healthcare system right now, they've recognized that there's this huge misconception that a Black body somehow doesn't feel pain the same as a different colored body or a brown body, et cetera. And a brain is a brain is a brain, and a body is a body is a body. And so we definitely want to dispel that myth that based on your ethnicity or your race, you'd feel pain different. That's not supported with the research. This slide just mentions a lot more of those adverse childhood experiences, but also some of the adverse community environments. Unfortunately, these situations do disproportionately impact the Black community, the Black and brown community. But you see there's a lot of things listed here: poor housing quality, discrimination in a lot of different arenas. All of these things compound to just hold our children and our adults back. And so we want to decrease those. This slide here is a quote by Carl Jung, and I will just be a little bit quiet for about a minute and give people a chance to read it. But the image ultimately explains it. And that is the idea that if we're hitting children, it's deeply ingrained in us, and we're likely to hit children as we grow up. It's one of those things that we just learn it, and it becomes a pattern that we share. Ask them to stop. That if that's the environment that we grow up in, we're very likely to continue that environment. Next slide. Epigenetics comes into this conversation because it really, in sort of common terms, epigenetics challenges the idea that all of our sort of cards are laid out for us in our DNA ahead of time. Actually, our DNA is sort of a set of options, and depending on what happens in our environment, epigenetics is the science that sort of looks at how our DNA displays itself. And so it relates to child development in that early on, our DNA is constantly reacting to what's around us as it chooses what proteins to make for our body. And so it's going to make kind of stressed and unhealthy, basically, choices if we're stressing the child, and hitting is going to stress the child. And then this slide talks a little bit more about epigenetics, about the fact that positive experiences also impact. So when we give a kid, all of the resources that they need, then it helps their genes flourish to what we, excuse me, what we would like to see. And then I think the last slide that we have talks about the intergenerational trauma. Trauma is basically a family story that gets passed on to us. And all of our stress affects our DNA. We're born sharing the stress and the pain of our parents and our grandparents. And the way that our body reacts to these circumstances is transgenerational epigenetics. And this ties in nicely just to the historical perspective and the idea that this is something that is a chain that we've got to break ultimately. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Katie. And so when we go into these spaces, we take all of this with us. I mentioned earlier in the conversation, for those of you who are just joining, I am the lobbyist for the Mississippi Coalition to End Corporal Punishment. And I talk to Republicans and I talk to Democrats in Mississippi. So if you look at the map of where corporal punishment is right now, where it's legal, a lot of those are southern states. And in my talking to mostly men, white men, black men, any color men, especially in Mississippi this session, I've heard a lot, I was beat. And it wasn't just black men who were beat, it was, white men who could vividly describe how they were beat by their parents because of the culture. So it's not just a black thing, but to see where corporal punishment still exists in the South brings it into play. Like, how is it culturally defined? Miss Ellen asks, have we taken a step back to define how we will be with our children? Because a lot of this is passed down. I have a 3-year-old that I've chosen to gentle parent with, like a first generation gentle parent, because violence has always been inside of my family. And I think from the historical context and from the mental and emotional context from what Katie shared, a lot of this is passed down, and some of it not even consciously, but passed down. So in this conversation, we also talk about the healing that must take place inside of our communities so that our students can flourish. But I'm going into this with the notion that our biggest barrier when we talk to policymakers and communities and even other organizations that should be invested in this fight is the barrier of them not seeing any other alternative or any other way, because this is the way that they have already known. Now, I want to be clear. When I talk to whoever I talk to, by the time that I end the conversation, they are thinking about violence and corporal punishment in a completely different way. Now, they still might be hesitant because of, I've been told many times, well, my colleagues might feel like this, or how do I talk to them about this? So we've realized since 2020, which was the year that the coalition was formed, that there is a lot of education that still must happen, not only in communities, but at the top with policymakers who don't even know that Mississippi leads the nation in total incidents of corporal punishment. They don't understand the impact of corporal punishment. They just think that students need to be beat. They don't understand why students are being beat in schools. They don't understand that it's for wearing the wrong color shirt, or female student having to go to the bathroom and gets to class late, and you're being told to reach for the stars or bend over and hold a chair by a male principal or a male coach. They're not understanding that students are getting physically hurt by this wooden paddle that's wrapped in tape that says take the wood or go to the hood, or that says Mr. Feelgood. They're not understanding that there is no dictation of how hard or how many times a student can get hit. If that teacher or that principal comes to school fed up and he has a student waiting on him in his office or in the hallway, he's going to take out whatever anger or frustration on that student. There's no one to say, oh, that's too hard, or, it happens. So we say you don't tear down a system without building one up, without putting some things in place. And that's in this session, I've learned to lead with the alternatives, because a lot of people are set in their ways and need to be pushed to think differently. Because a lot of people understand, like, I was whooped by my parents and I was whooped in school. No, I don't necessarily think it's right, but that's how I was raised. That's all I know. So my role in all of this is to introduce the alternatives, to say to these 17 states who actively use corporal punishment that a lot of the other states are not being violent towards students. They have alternatives in place. They have ways to deal with not necessarily student discipline, because Ms. Ellen talked about some of these incidents that are going on or are just normal child behavior, talking in class, being antsy, needing to move around. I got put out of the class for asking too many questions, for being too opinionated. I would have been paddled, but I had agency over my own body, and I said I'm not going to get paddled. But you have students who don't have that say so, and they feel like it's okay, and this is going on inside the schools. So when we talk about the effective alternatives and holistically safe school environments for students, we talk about the mental health therapists and counselors being present in schools and accessible to students, because we have a lot of that going on. If you all visit our coalition page, we have an interview with Miss Rhoda Burns, who was a teacher for 43 years. And she learned through her experience working with students that anytime there's a need that's not being met, a student acts up. So she has to figure out which of these needs is not being met, not to meet a student with violence. Because I'll reiterate what Katie said. Katie said a brain is a brain is a brain, and a body is a body is a body. But violence is violence is violence. If we're teaching violence, and this is a lot of times what I say, if the only thing that we're teaching is violence, then why do we overreact or get negative when we hear about so much violence going on if we've not incorporated conflict resolution, restorative justice, peer mediation, community service learning programs, peace circles, after school programs, and brought in community organizations who already some do this existing work to make school environments safer for students, for teachers, for everybody involved, for communities as well. Because we know when we understand the school to prison pipeline, whatever happens in the school, it's a pipeline, or whatever happens in the community, it's a pipeline. So if we're teaching students in schools, every conflict is a regular part of life, but every conflict, every dispute does not have to have to end or escalate to violence. You can directly see if they're being taught these skills in elementary, middle, high school, how that could benefit the community greatly, because we have teachers and we have parents and adults and old people, elders, who right now don't know how to deal with conflict, don't know how to deal with rejection, don't know how to deal with stress or emotions, because it's something that hasn't been taught or shown. And that's the conversation that we are leading with when we talk about ending corporal punishment. And at the federal level, we're pushing PASA, which sends funds to make sure that these alternatives are put in place and implemented. When I'm talking to representatives, I know one was like, well, all of these are great alternatives, but how do we implement it? How does this work? So it's like we almost have to walk them through this. It's worked plenty of times before, but they need to see how it will work, how it could be implemented, and how the money gets allocated to that particular alternative, and the resources go where they need to go. So at the federal level, we're working on PASTA, making sure that overall corporal punishment is eliminated from schools. And I would also say that in most states, corporal punishment is only allowed in schools, not in foster care centers, not in jails, not in juvenile detention centers, not in daycares, but in public schools. This is a little bit more about PASA. We're going to drop a link. And if you have time, if you would like to dedicate your resources and time to making sure that your voice is heard, you can get on the link and see the script to call your representative to urge them to co-sponsor PASA. And so what the Mississippi Coalition to End Corporal Punishment is doing now at the federal level, yes, we're trying to reach out to legislators to let them know what's going on. Of course, there are so many other issues going on, but we want to make sure that our voice is heard around these issues. And we are also bringing in being more intentional about bringing in the mental health component of this fight, reaching out to the Black social workers at these HBCUs and colleges to bring their voices into this, because it has to be so unique to experience violence, but then to really learn and be invested in a degree that teaches you that corporal punishment is wrong. We need their voices at the front inside of this. And also other national organizations whose mission aligns with this, but their voice is not on the front lines where they need to be. And all of this is important because the more support we have, of course, the likelier it is to be eliminated at these state levels and also at the national level. Before I go here, I'm going to pass it to Hashim.
Wonderful. Thank you for that enlightenment. As you said, others would leave away, those that you talk to at the State House and at the Capitol, they will walk away seeing corporal punishment in a much different manner. And I have seen corporal punishment in a much different manner from these last minutes in this live feed. So thank you for that information. I do know from working in the community, working around education, that for over 13 years, that there is generational trauma around and inside education. And when I say generational trauma, as Katie elaborated, specifically in the brain and the DNA and how that contributed to our, physical body, the generational trauma is that the parent will go to the school and have a bad experience, and oftentimes take their children to that same school as adults that they had a bad experience at. So they are already in conflict before they even arrive. So the spirit, the energy, the perspective, all is already in conflict. The grandparents have a discontent or challenges in the school passed on to the child, who passes on to the next generation this discontent. So we realized and experienced through hands-on working with members in the community around out-of-school suspensions, expulsions, attending suspension and expulsion hearings, going to meetings in regards to disciplinary actions that were taken, that we've not only had to deal with the trauma of the child, but also the trauma of the parent. So that's a very real fact. And that's before we even get to the idea of that child being hit or struck or assaulted inside of the classroom. And so all of that is actually 100% opposite, completely contrary to the desire to make school a learning community, to make school a learning community. So to a place where a child can go and flourish and learn and be excited about school, be excited about learning through new things. How is that done is the question. How do we have children that are excited about learning, passionate, driven, engaged, inspired, and desirous of taking in more and more knowledge so that they can live up to the fullest of their potential? How do we achieve those things? And what we're talking about today, eliminating corporal punishment, is necessary to get to that type of environment. That type of environment is engagement that we've been introduced as culturally relevant curriculum. Culturally relevant curriculum. And we've been promoting culturally relevant curriculum for the last 8 years. Racial Justice Now, the West Dayton Youth Task Force, Dayton, Ohio, and Montgomery County, Maryland. We've been promoting it, and we're on our 8th year of promoting, again, culturally relevant curriculum. And this year, we've been under the theme of libraries, literacy, learning styles, and a love for learning. To make young people excited about knowledge, to see them, is to help them to see themselves in the curriculum, to see themselves in the lesson plans, so they can be excited. And through their excitement, they are more apt to take in the information. They are more apt to grow and to expand and to develop under the information that is being shared with them. Through learning styles, it's a very important piece of culturally relevant curriculum, because we learn that Black children or African American children or African children or original children have different learning styles than others. Oftentimes, according to our scholars, such as Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu, he taught us that many African American boys have the dominant learning style of kinesthetic. They are often hands-on learners. Now, why is this important? Because oftentimes, more than often, the standard in the American classroom is through an audio. I'm going to stand up front. I'm going to tell it to you. Maybe I'll put a few things on the board, but I'm going to tell it to you and you tell it back to me. And that's what, if you can tell it back to me, then you're smart. And if you can't, well, you're not so smart. And so that one learning style is only one of many learning styles. My beautiful wife, she is an audio learner. She can put on the lecture and catch it. Other students are visual learners. They want to see diagrams. They want to see pictures. They want to see it broken up into sections, into parts. They want to see colors. Other children want to use their hands to manipulate what they're learning. They need to draw it out or to create diagrams that they can move with their hands, or have learning tools that engage them physically as well as mentally. You know, so there's a range of learning styles that teachers, administrators, educators should be trained on in their professional development, in their school system as they come up through the ranks as to become a teacher, or in their teaching hours or apprenticeship programs. They want to practice using the range of learning styles. Again, if you are seeking to engage a student, and we've already said that the opposite of engagement is to beat the child, that's to disengage them. To assault them is to make them want to leave the classroom, not be in the classroom, to shy away from the classroom. It's to bring them embarrassment. It's to bring them a feeling of low self-esteem. It's to bring them a feeling of less than, and embarrassment among their peers. So very little to nothing comes good out of corporal punishment in the classroom and in general. So again, it really is the opposite of engagement. It really is the opposite of helping a student to see themselves in the curriculum and to make an association with the curriculum so that they can better learn and better acquire the information, better analyze, observe, and come to conclusions of the information, and to be critical thinkers. And so all of this is a connection to literacy, because we want the children to love to read, to want to read, to ask to read, to be inspired to read, to feel the joy of reading, of learning new things. And what's the opposite of joy? Getting beat, being assaulted. That's the opposite of joy. So in our campaign to promote culturally relevant curriculum, we want to create a love for learning. And so just some simple methods of creating culturally relevant curriculum is to take the names of your students and put them into your examples. You know, just take the names of the local community stores, the local community rec centers, the local community persons that are high achievers, the local communities of people that have done positive works in the community. Put them in your curriculum. Create associations with positive associations, positive connections that will help to engage the student so that they will see themselves in the curriculum and therefore better want to work with it, work amongst it, work not against it, but work inside of it. And it's a relationship to the curriculum, to the syllabus, to what's being taught. So Racial Justice Now, we've been promoting culturally relevant curriculum for 8 years in collaboration with the Dignity in Schools campaign. We do have a culturally relevant curriculum toolkit, which you can see at our website at racialjusticenow.org. You can see this toolkit. You can see our 12-point plan to push school districts forward. You can see our webinar series on restorative justice, histomatics, how you can include history and mathematics into culturally relevant curriculum. You can see an interview with Dr. Molefi Asante, one of the great doctors from Temple University, who came up with a theory called the centric idea. The centric idea. This is Dr. Molefi Asante, the chair at Temple University for the Africana Studies department there. He had a centric idea. He's quoted as saying, through observations, inquiry, and discussion, I found that children who are centered in their own cultural information are better students, more disciplined, and have a greater motivation for schoolwork. That's the centric idea by Dr. Molefi Asante. So all of the scholarship, there's scholarship there, Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, and other scholars there for teachers, for community members, for educators, for administrators, principals, school district cabinet members, lots of information there. The Portland baseline essays there are there for you to advise your teachers and your community members for professional development. If you don't know anything about the history, the rich history of African Americans or Hispanic Americans or Asian Americans, you can tap in to the Portland baseline essays for free. They're available for free, and you can find out more information at the Culturally Relevant Curriculum Toolkit. So again, we are working to eliminate corporal punishment in schools. Corporal punishment is the opposite of engagement. the opposite of association and connection, and it's the opposite to creating a love for learning and a community of learners. So we support the campaign, and from Racial Justice Now, we support eliminating corporal punishment in schools in Mississippi and beyond. We thank our family in Mississippi for all of their great work, for their leadership, and we look forward to the ending of corporal punishment in schools.
Absolutely. This has been, wow, an amazing presentation by the Nollie Jenkins Family Center. Thank you all so much for the information that you all shared with everyone. I think we only had one question. I just wanted to kind of go back to see if folks saw the question from, I put it up a few times. It was, I believe, just one question from, I believe, Miss Betty Petty. Let me see if I can go back and find it, and I'll highlight it for you all and see if there's anybody that would like to ask the question. Do you remember?
Yeah, Ellen. Yes, there was also a question from someone who indicated, and I really like this, and to me, it's set the tone. Her question was, "What else can I do? That's all I know." There was a question raised.
Right.
I appreciate that because, you know, again, I said, you know, we're 500 years of enslavement. We as a community have really never had the opportunity to engage in a discussion like this. You know, for Kameisha mentioned gentle parenting. That's a new kind of term that's coming on board. But I think for parents, for those of us who do not want to hit, and I have 50-year-old sons, and Lord knows I did my share of spanking children during that time. But as I've evolved, I also have to think about, and particularly for Black parents, one of the things we say when we see children acting up in the store, the first thing we say, yeah, he would, if he was mine, he wouldn't be doing that, or she wouldn't be doing that. I think we also have to recognize that children are individuals. They're not our property. We don't own them. They have a right to self-develop and self-actualize. So as a parent, sometimes, and I have a 5-year-old in my life who reminds me when I'm being impatient, when I am asking for something that she can't give me. I think a lot of changing our behavior is really listening, checking in on ourselves. What is it about this child that's raising some issues for me? I think we have to look at self more than we have to look at children. Children can help us to grow in ways that we never think about. You know, they are independent. I think as parents, we have to forget the notion that always as a Black parent, our children have to be on point. They cannot be out of line in the community because some mama, daddy, Black mama, daddy gonna be up there saying, look at this child out of control. If it was mine, I'd knock her down. Those are the messages that we receive for generations. And those are the messages that we then have to step back and think, I'm engaging in that. How do I not engage in that? And we look to others in so many ways to say our parenting skills are on point. But we really, as a community, have to think about, you know, I've got children, Kameisha's baby, who flips. I allow these children to do somersaults in stores. What's wrong with it as long as they're not hurting anybody else? So I guess I'm saying basically, we really have to rethink our own parenting skills, how we see children inside of communities, and how we bring forth what it is we want our children to really be when they grow up. Because the reality is Black mothers kill children at a higher rate than any other group of people. We don't mean to. It is the truth. Black mothers kill their children because, again, it is what we go to because that's what we know. They don't mean to kill the children, but once you hit a child, you've set that child and yourself up for that to happen. I'll stop here for other panelists to share their thoughts about it. But I hope I'm getting at your question. And maybe this is a time for us to start to think about how do we look at Black parenting in a very different way? And maybe we need to start a group that really looks at these issues. And I'll stop here.
Absolutely. Kameisha, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say, I mentioned that Nollie's is about over 25 years old, but we've always had a youth leadership program, and we've always worked in an intergenerational model. And at any time before we had the resources to get to a bigger space, we had about 30 to 35 students at a time, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week. We never hit students. We've never been violent towards students, and we deal with the same student rooms, but we do it in a community settings. They knew we would never hit them or degrade them or be violent towards them, but it's about the environment, because when they came in, we did ground rules together. We didn't say what you're not going to do and what I'm not going to. We created a safe space together, so they felt like, and we had elementary babies, middle school, high school. They felt like they were a part, they belonged there, and they knew that if they did something wrong, like their actions would impact everyone at NJFC. So I'll just uplift that, because it's about the upbringing and it's about the space that they are in. Because like I said, we've been doing this for years and years and years, and none of our babies in the program can say that I was hit by someone at Nollie's, or they didn't make me feel loved. So it definitely can be done, because we've been doing SEL, we've been doing all of that in the community settings. And it just takes all of what we talked about, but also that bridge, that gap between the community organizations who are on the ground doing the work and the schools. It has to be a bridge that connects that, because the schools can't do it all. And if you have organizations in the communities who are already doing restorative justice or culturally relevant curriculum and offering that as a service, why not connect in that way? So I just wanted to uplift it.
I love that. This has like just been a wholesale, like very thorough conversation. I love the fact that you all included a historical analysis. That is something that I believe that is critically to any in conversation talking about disproportionality in race and things like that. I love the fact that there was someone watching, lifting up the fact that, you know what, these are also communities who are overstressed, folks who are living paycheck to paycheck, right? Folks who are, experiencing stress related to trying to make ends meet, to meet the basic needs of their household, like worrying about trying to pay rent, trying to pay for the light bill, trying to pay for everything. And that there's also a disproportionality when it comes to being working class and not having those basic needs met. That also has a racial disparity that unfortunately also contributes, as someone mentioned earlier, to the higher rate of Black women responsible for the killing of their children, which we all just, our hearts bleed to hear things like that. So there clearly is a lot more that we can be doing in the community as well to offer this type of education. I want to encourage everyone who is still listening, please share this video with your church, right? Share this video with if you're part of a sorority or fraternity, share it with other people so that we begin to educate our community in particular about this particular issue, and so that we can get PASA, as you mentioned earlier, Kameisha, passed, and we gave the link in the chat as well, so that we have people who are clicking on the link as they're watching, they're sharing the link as well. We have people sharing this video. This will go a long way in helping to educate and provide opportunities to do other things besides assault children. So thank you, Nollie Jenkins Family Center, for being the lead organization in this entire country, forcing a conversation around assaulting children. The fact that it is still legal to assault children in 19 states in this country, and that there is a federal bill to take care of that, to make sure that it is outlawed, to make sure that children, right, are no longer assaulted in schools as a form of discipline. Thank you all so much for this very rich conversation. I want to encourage each of you, for people who may want to know how they can reach you, feel free, if you like, to leave an email. For people who are watching in the chat, please feel free to do that as well. With that, we want to thank everyone who.
Zakiya,
Sure.
Zakiya, I'm sorry. Can we
Sure,
have one more minute? We just want
Sure.
to, Kameisha, would you lift up an action that we're doing this week? It's related to state-sanctioned violence as well.
Thank
Kameisha,
you.
can you talk
Thank
about it?
Mhm.
Thanks.
Yes, so we're connecting policing of Black bodies to policing of Black hair. There has been a couple of incidents, probably more than we know, but the Mississippi Coalition to End Corporal Punishment is going to Texas to stand in solidarity with Daryl George, who has been out of school since August of 2023 because he refused to cut his locks. And in 2024, we have to have a Crown Act that protects Black hair. But these type of discriminatory policies are happening all across the South, and they're going to continue to spread. So with him being out of school for so long, he and his mother filed a federal lawsuit against the school district, saying that, you know, the Crown Act was passed and they discriminated against him and removed him from school. We will be traveling down. I know it's short notice, but for everyone who would like to know more about the case, how to get involved, we really want to uplift this on social media. We have created a toolkit in partnership with the Coalition, Texas Appleseed, Dr. Candace Matthews, the attorney for Daryl George, a toolkit that can be used to uplift and amplify the Crown Act and what's going on in Texas. And if we don't stop it and be proactive, it's going to continue to go on. So Black girls and Black boys and anybody who has natural hair and is forced to be confined on how they should wear their hair. So we have that going on, and just want to uplift that we're working to end the school to prison pipeline, and this dismantling policies around corporal punishment, about violence, about Black hair, all of those things. So we're getting hit at a lot of different angles, but as long as we stay proactive and stay involved and show up to support one another, because we're caravanning with 15 students and parents down to Texas. But we would love for you all to Facebook, change your profile picture to Daryl George's photo. You'll see all of that in a toolkit. Make a blast, make a post, send us pictures of your natural hair just to show support. He's a senior getting ready to go out of high school, and for the last almost year, he's been dealing with this issue. So thank you all.
Thank you. And we have it up on the screen for people to see. We also shared it in the chat so that people can access it there as well. Again, we want to thank everybody that has watched today. Again, we hope that you share this again in other situations that you're in with other groups of people so that we can share this video far and wide to ensure that people have access to alternatives. It does matter. It does matter. Thank you all so much for joining us today, learning about this coalition in Mississippi with the Nollie Jenkins Family Center. And as well, please go back into the chat. We have shared email addresses. We have also shared the links to everything that we've shared as well. The toolkit is there in the comments as well. So we want to make sure that folks know that you can go back into the comment section here and get access to this video, and you'll have the emails for some of the presenters as well, so that you can email them in case you have any further questions. With that, we want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon in our final virtual town hall that we should be having in the next month or so. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Ellen Reedy. Thank you, Hashim Jabar, Kameisha Smith, and everyone who joined us today for this very timely conversation. Katie Coates, thank you for bringing the nurse perspective, the health perspective. Talking about ACEs was very important to the conversation. So thank you all so much. Enjoy your day, everyone. And we're ending the stream now. Thank you.
Thank you.